Hello, class. This is one of my favorite topics. But this particular lesson is World War II in Europe. Now, this is an American history class, so you're not going to see a whole lot of stuff on the EOC about it, but still, there's a few things. So we're going to go over it. Plus, I like this topic. I hope you do too. First of all, memorize these dates. When was World War II? It started in 1939 with the German invasion of Poland, and it ended in the year 1945 with the bombing of the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Okay? And so remember, we're going to focus on American involvement with the EOC, but there are a few things I need to go over with you. First of all, what caused World War II in Europe? The Texas standards say that it was German and Italian aggression. So no matter what I teach you, it's never going to be in a lot of detail, but still. Also, some other world history concepts, the appeasement of Hitler. I'll rush through that real quick. The Treaty of Versailles that ended World War II really pissed off Germany. And racism, because Hitler invaded countries that had a lot of Jews. Okay? So the Axis powers, you might call them the bad guys, the Germans, the Japanese, and the Italians. And these are, this is Adolf Hitler on the right and Mussolini for Italy. Both of these are fascist dictators. They are totalitarian dictators, okay? And then you have the Japanese Emperor Hirohito, okay? And check out those shoes, okay? The real guy who was in charge of Japan really was the General Tojo. He was the planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, okay? And on our side, there were a lot of countries on our side, but the big three are the United States, the UK, and the Soviet Union. You also had Canada, Australia, and any British colony, including India, was on our side, okay? And France, okay? The president of the United States during World War II and earlier during the Great Depression was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was president for 4 terms. He died in his 4th term. Okay? The British, you had Winston Churchill, and in the Soviet Union, you had Josef Stalin. Okay? So the Treaty of Versailles really blamed and humiliated the Germans for World War I, even though it wasn't their fault. So in a way, the Treaty of Versailles helped cause World War II. Because if you look at all this stuff, the Rhineland, this orange piece, was supposed to be demilitarized. So guess what the first thing Hitler did when he came to power? He marched his troops into the Rhineland. And then Germany was forbidden to unite with Austria. Well, guess what? Hitler united with Austria. He just walked into Austria and took it over without any fighting. And then finally, he invaded Poland. This piece of yellow right here, that used to belong to Germany. So when Hitler invaded Poland, he thought he was just taking back what was rightfully Germany's. Hitler did not think that invading Poland was going to start World War II, but it did. Okay? So here's a picture of Hitler coming to power in 1933. The Germans were desperate and hungry, and they saw Hitler come along as a strong man, and they thought Hitler's going to take care of things. He's going to make Germany great again. That was a slogan during the time, make Germany great again. Also, Hitler and the Nazis, they blamed the Jews for all of Germany's problems. Okay, and as you can see, you can see the Star of David right here. They're going to start blaming the Jews for everything. Okay, how did Germany escape the Depression? By militarizing, by violating the Treaty of Versailles, by building tanks and guns and putting millions of men in the military, because you can't be unemployed if you're in the army. Fascism, which is, I don't really want to get into it, but Germany relied on mass rallies such as this one. Okay? And rallies proved useful in getting an entire country to support the Nazis. Remember, Volkswagen is a German car. Okay? Fascism uses a lot of psychology, a lot of indoctrination. Like, look at this popsicle that this kid is eating. Okay? And censorship, burning books. Okay? To tell people what they can and can't read. Okay? And the use of young people to do things like this. Okay? People who weren't specifically told to do it, but did it on their own. The Nazis relied on people like this. And so I've seen this poster a million times. Everyone's going, Heil Hitler, and this guy's like, I ain't heiling nobody. Well, you know what happens to guys like this? They get thrown into concentration camps. So remember that. If you want to do that, you want to be brave, fine, but you have to face the consequences. Okay? And so everyone kept appeasing Hitler. They kept giving Hitler everything he wanted without making him fight for it. Here are the Germans marching into Austria, took the whole country without fighting. And then the Germans marched into Czechoslovakia, no fighting there too. And so Hitler kept giving the finger to the League of Nations. And finally, Hitler invaded Poland. And within 6 months, he took over Poland. And that is when England and France declared war against Hitler, and that's when the war started in Europe. But the United States will not be involved until December of 1941. So through 1939, 1940, and through 1941, Europe is going to be fighting this without the United States. So there's a meme. All right, and just here's a cool picture of Warsaw, Poland. I like color photographs. So one reason for the outbreak of World War II was the what? Now, this might be important, but probably not. It was the ineffectiveness of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was supposed to prevent this from happening, but Hitler just gave it the finger. It's like, what are you going to do? You don't have an army. You have no enforcement power. So Hitler, in 6 weeks, just 6 weeks, he took over most of Paris, most of France. France was supposed to be one of the big enemies of Germany. France was supposed to fight Germany with all their tanks and their army. And England was supposed to fight Germany with their ships and their air force. But now France is out of the picture. And here's a Frenchman just crying. Here's Germans accepting the surrender from French soldiers. Okay. German planes, Stuka dive bombers. Oh, and don't forget, I learned recently that the Germans were all on meth, Benzodrine tablets, and they'd put them in their food and their chocolate. And the French were just amazingly surprised at how much speed that the Germans had. Well, literally, the Germans were on speed. So once France surrendered, then the British had to fight the Germans by themselves. Luckily, they had a strip of water protecting them. And when you have home field advantage, it gives you an advantage in the air battle. Okay? Also, when you have these planes shooting British bombers, that gave British the advantage. But the British barely held on. Okay? One thing that I have seen once on the EOC is radar, the technology of radar. It was developed in World War II, and it helped the British fight off the Germans. And the Germans didn't know what radar was, and so the British put out pamphlets saying that their pilots ate a lot of carrots to help them with their eyesight. And which wasn't true. And that's where we get this myth that carrots help your eyes. It's not true. It was from World War II. So radar was a new technology. And then the Germans, after defeating France and weakening England, Germany turned around and invaded the Soviet Union. And we always talk about how the cold was an advantage of the Soviets, and it was. But come on, I mean, the Soviets, their advantage was that they were willing to die for their country. 21 million dead in the Soviet Union fighting the Germans. So yeah, the cold was a big deal, but so was the fact that they were willing to die for their country, and they had home field advantage. And the Soviet Union was the biggest country in the world. Okay. The idea that the Soviet soldier was unarmed and stuff, that's kind of exaggerated. Most of them weren't armed as well as this one, though. But anyway. And women, one thing that the Soviets were willing to do was use their women. This woman had 300 confirmed kills as a sniper. They had entire platoons of women snipers. Okay, and these women were pilots in the Soviet Union, and they would fly at night, and that's where they got their name, night witches. These women are serious. So as you can see, by 1942, the Germans had an incredible, massive advantage as far as land that they had. And you had the Soviet Union over here, and you had the British over here. How are they supposed to take on all of this? It's incredible. Okay? Now, this is important. By 1944, the United States was in this war. And, you know, we're Americans, so we focus on the American role, and this is it. The invasion of a region of France called Normandy, France, the beaches of Normandy. Watch the movie Saving Private Ryan if you're into war movies, that beach invasion. And if you've played Call of Duty, you've probably played this before, where you invade the beaches of France. These things were put there by the Germans to prevent ships from landing, big ships from landing on the beaches. So these soldiers would land, and the Germans would be firing at them with MG-42s, and it was pretty bad at times. Okay, the planes would bomb those French beaches the night before, but sometimes they would actually bomb over here to make the Germans think we were going to invade over here, but then we actually invaded over here on the beaches of Normandy, France. Here's a colorized photo of the day after of the beaches of Normandy. You notice I keep saying Normandy. Okay. Now, one thing that it did was the invasion of Normandy, France, forced the Germans to fight on two fronts. A front in the east against the Soviets, and a front in the west against the Americans and the British and the Canadians. Two fronts. So this is what I have the students write down. Opened a second front against Germany. It's also called D-Day, June 6, 1944. Okay. All right, write that down if you're taking notes, but I'm moving on. Hit pause. All right, General Eisenhower, this is important. He was the president of the United States in the 1950s, but during the 40s, he was the commander-in-chief of all of the troops in Europe. So he was the one who was in charge of D-Day. He was the general of generals. And he was a really good president if you ignore the fact that he didn't do anything for black people in the 1950s. But other than that, he was a good president. He kept us out of war in the 50s. He ended the Korean War. So yeah, he was a pretty good president. We'll talk more about him later. So here's a colorized photo of him talking to the troops on the day before D-Day, the Normandy invasion. And here's a map of the D-Day Normandy invasion. All right, so here's a question. During World War II, the Allied invasion of France on D-Day was significant because it did what? Hit pause. The answer is D. If I went too fast, it's because you didn't pause. Okay? This was an EOC question. Okay? So hit pause and read it. This 1944 order was addressed to U.S. troops sent to do what? And the answer is C, invade the beaches at Normandy. Okay. Penicillin was invented during this time. It was used on the beaches of Normandy for the first time, and it saved a lot of lives because bullets don't kill as many soldiers as infections do. And penicillin is an antibiotic. So that happened, okay? Also, gonorrhea also hurts. It puts soldiers out of, it's a venereal disease, an STI, and gonorrhea can be cured by penicillin. So that's going to help the soldiers too. Here are the troops in Paris after D-Day. They liberated Paris and pushed the Germans back. And here are the Parisians being happy. Here's some German tanks. That's a Tiger on the right, a T-32 or a T-34 on the left. I'm not sure. I act like I know more than I do. Okay, how do you take out a tank? With a Panzerfaust. Here's the city of Germany before we bombed it. And then we bombed it. And there's a picture of it after we bombed it. Just destroyed it. So we didn't need an atomic bomb to destroy German cities. We just needed 1,000 planes. Okay. Here's a really cool picture. This is on the list of things you need to know, that the United States Army liberated concentration camps. You probably learn more about the Holocaust in English class than you do in U.S. history. In a class, I actually have a few video clips that I show, but here's a pretty disturbing colorized photograph of the American troops finding a concentration camp. And General Eisenhower knew that people were going to deny that the Holocaust ever happened, so he showed pictures and video to German POWs. And this is their reaction to seeing what the Nazi government was doing in those camps. And they didn't know. Remember, the Holocaust was a secret. The most Germans did not know it was happening. Okay? So Germany's end. Germany lost World War II. The Soviet Union did most of the work. We did most of the bombing. We did do some work, but the Soviets are the ones that lost the most people. Okay? So in summary, for the EOC, you need to know the dates. Invasion of Normandy, France, opened up a second front. Eisenhower, the Holocaust was after the Jews, and the liberation of concentration camps. Okay? So next would be World War II from the on the home front. That's going to be even more important. All right, that's enough for this lesson. Thank you.